everybody. Welcome back to the Divorce Chronicles. I am your host, Shauna Warden, and today we are talking about something that so many women navigating divorce struggle with, trying to stay calm, rational, and reasonable, all while dealing with someone who isn't. If you've ever felt like explaining, compromising, and it's still getting nowhere, this episode is for you. If you're walking through separation or divorce and completely feel overwhelmed by the financial side of things, the spreadsheets, the assets, the unknowns, the what does this mean long term, today's episode is going to bring you some clarity. Today, I'm joined by Victoria. She was on last season, so we're happy to have her back. She's a certified divorce financial analyst, a nationally certified professional in mediation, and a certified divorce specialist. She's the founder of Divorce Analytics and Wealth Analytics, where she helps families make data-driven financial decisions during major life transitions like divorce and death. What I appreciate about Victoria's approach is that she brings facts into a space that often feels emotionally charged. She focuses on reducing long-term financial risk, preserving resources, and helping families make sustainable decisions, not reactive ones. With experience in financial services and managing a family business, she has a gift for translating financial complexity into clear, practical guidance. Victoria, I am so glad you are here. Welcome to the show.
Okay, I think we're good to go.
So, Victoria, what prompted you to write the newsletter, this content, this specific topic?
Well, as you know, January tends to be the beginning of divorce kickoff season, and I have just gotten a flood of cases that are like 2 to 5 years in the
my gosh.
making. Yeah. And my clients, even though they've been going through a multi-year long divorce, they don't have clean financials. They don't even have spousal support. Everything that should have been done has gotten delayed, unfortunately. And it's because they started off really on the wrong divorce foot. And as a result, now they're in divorce purgatory, and that sucks.
Yeah, and just to kind of fill the listener in on what the content of the newsletter was, you had talked about being in this mediation purgatory where, it obviously varies state by state, but here in Virginia, you have to be separated for like 6 months with no kids before divorcing, a year with kids before divorcing. But then sometimes, like you're saying, it can turn into 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and you can't move on with your life. You don't really know what's going on with your finances. Everything's just kind of like on hold and you can't do anything. And what we run into a lot is, and the newsletter talked about like the high conflict type divorces where you do get stuck because that high conflict person is either not giving the full picture, they're not forthcoming with the finances, they're, getting continuances or what have you. There's all these plays in the handbook to like belabor these things, right? And so then you and I come in and it's like, okay, what are we doing? And like, what is happening, right? So how do you think people get to this space?
Well, I've seen a lot of clients. I normally work with the aggrieved party. And first off, to begin with, I should clarify that this is not financial advice. This is strictly for general education purposes. And if you do have specific case questions, reach out to a professional that can help you. I offer free consultations. I know, Shauna, I don't know if you do too, but
Yep.
So really our whole goal is to help you become educated so you don't end up in divorce purgatory. And so with that being said, I see clients end up in this position because they have empathy. Like they thought that their spouse was going to conduct themselves with maybe not a high amount of class, but that they're not invested or they're invested in not going to court, that they want to find amicability, that even if the divorce has made them unreasonable, that they are going to eventually come to reasonability because of the war of attrition. And so let me explain what that actually means. Divorce is actually designed when you're going through the legal system, it is expensive. It is also not designed to handle all of the cases that it has. And as a result, the system essentially uses the war of attrition, which is a series of small or large economic losses along the way, to get those parties that are being temporarily unreasonable back to reasonability. But unfortunately, when you have someone that doesn't care about how much money it costs, and if they are have opposite motivations than you, right? I deal a lot with high conflict cases, and my clients tend to, they just want out. They are looking for a low cost option, and they hope and dream and pray that their spouse is also going to want to move on with their life and not spend an arm and a leg on divorce professionals. And unfortunately, when the higher conflict spouse is using this process as either a way to continue the abuse, or, they want to adjudicate the emotions, because unfortunately, divorce bring when you by the time you get to the legal side of the equation, this is not about emotional closure, unfortunately. You are probably never going to get that. And unfortunately, one spouse, yeah, are holding out. They want to be right. They want someone to tell them that they're right. And they are going to fight tooth and nail to get that, because they do not have the same objectives as you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, what I see a lot is, like you said, one person is operating under good faith, like, okay, this really sucks. Maybe I didn't even want this, but, let's come together, be mature, and handle our finances and children and what have you in like a reasonable manner. And then are really surprised that the other person's like, no, I'm not going to make this easy for you. Why would I? You know what I mean? And so a lot of it is, like you said, adjusting expectations of, our clients, of, the closure that you're never going to get. Because I think a lot of women specifically, we spend a lot of time. Why is he doing this? What is he getting out of this? And like, the emotional labor, like you're saying, right? And instead, it's like, okay, there is a time and a place to kind of unpack all of that. But right now, we don't have the answers. And that's blocking you from being able to look at this, in a black and white manner with like numbers on a page and, all of those things. And so having to teach them to like, put this in a box for later, but like right now we have other things that we need to focus on. And I always tell people, unfortunately, like you really don't know who you're married to until you go to divorce them, and they become this whole other person, right? Or not, like they might have been an asshole the whole time, and that's why you're getting divorced. So why are you expecting them not to be an asshole?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to have those conversations, and they do have these like aha moments of like, okay, yeah, you're right. I don't know why I'm expecting this to be easy, right? So in your field, what does being unreasonable look like?
It's a really good question, Jonna. Unreasonability looks like a failure to disclose assets, a desire to control the process. I will handle some mediation cases, and when a high conflict spouse comes into the picture, you can always tell, because they do not want to wait. They want to control everything. And unfortunately, being a financial analyst and a family financial mediator, everything I do is very tedious in nature until the report is finally published, because we need to understand your budget. We need to understand how much you are currently spending as a married couple, what your post divorce cost of living looks like, their income available for support, and the recipient's earning capacity. So generally, most parties do not have the budget, right? And so you have to go through and build all of these pieces out, and then you're able to negotiate. But this is a process, and you need to be able to allow it to work. And so when one spouse, I've also seen a lot of the time, the higher conflict spouse, they're willing to do mediation as long as they are able to continue the bullying. And if they're able to, like, they generally have something that they want to hide or that they don't want to divide, and everything's going to go great up until you get to that point, and then you actually have to talk about the stuff they don't want to. And then like
Mhm.
all hell breaks loose and it becomes a process in which it's weaponized and there's really unless you're really skilled at this and you have outside influence, it just gets put off the rails. And so another thing I see people doing is that they elect to go with mediation because they think it's going to be low cost. Well,
Mhm.
really, you need to have a consulting attorney that's going to explain, what you're entitled to under law. Going kind of white knuckling it is not ideal. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to spend more than like $10,000 on this. And unfortunately, divorce is just expensive. It
Mhm.
sucks. People don't realize when you get married, that's the beginning of your actual like personal business relationship that we call a family. A part of the divorce now, you have to go through and deal with the emotional, social, financial, and finally legal phase of this. And so many people jump straight from the emotional into the legal and they don't define the facts for whatever reason. I work a lot with spouses that have had no insight into the money and they have a lot of feelings of resentment and maybe a little bit of shame and guilt that they didn't take a stronger role. But I think it's important for people to realize that most families have a division of labor. You know, we're only like one person. And so it's very hard to like run a household and pay the bills and, make sure your kids get to soccer practice on time.
Yeah.
Under a good marriage, there's that division of labor where one person takes care of the financial assets and the other takes care of the human assets. And now, as a part of the divorce, there is a lot of uncomfortable financial feelings. Some of them are from our inherited beliefs from our family members, and a lot have actually occurred during the marriage where an unrealistic financial narrative was created. I unfortunately see a lot of the time where I have female clients, they are pistol packing mamas that are making good money, and their spouse has weaponized being unemployed.
Yes, I'm seeing that so much lately. Where on one hand, I'm like, yes, queen, I love that you're the breadwinner. Like, go for it, right? But then it's like, okay, my husband tried to run his own business, but he's like mostly sitting on the couch, 5 days a week, and like, and it's very gender stereotype. And of course, there's like exceptions to every rule. But typically, when you see a stay-at-home mom, like you said, she is the CEO of that household. She is still contributing to the kids, the house, the groceries, like all of that stuff where just like within the past month, I've had so many women where it's like, I put myself through law school. I built my firm and he did and raised the kids and he just kind of like languished, right? And now he wants half of everything that I've earned. And then the
And
men
spousal
are like,
support.
well, if it was the other way around, you would be asking this, you would be doing the same thing. And it's like, but it's not the same because even when stay at home moms are in this position, they're getting screwed over anyway because it's like, well, you that whole capacity to earn income, maybe they did have a degree, but then they both decided that she would stay at home and now she wants, at least to get on her feet. And it's like, no, you need to figure it out yourself. So it's like, either way, it seems like women just get screwed no matter what. And that's my own personal feelings based on what I see.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I work in a variety of different states, all 50 states, and I have actually experienced Virginia cases, and it is like maddening because you have to work to get spousal support in the state of Virginia when, like in California, you get clear slam dunk, but Virginia is like, I don't know. And so
Right. I know.
you really have to lean into the financial facts because I always like to say you can't gaslight a spreadsheet. And so the more that you actually enumerate, okay, we were spending $25,000 a month as a married couple. Now, we're going to have a change of like household expenses. And so, it's going to be about 12 and 12. And when you go through the spousal support equation, if you are either facing a situation where your spouse is underemployed or you are, a stay-at-home parent, there's something called income imputation where you can either get a vocational assessor or you can use your historical earning capacity to determine what that person's income should be. So once you are looking through that lens, it becomes a pretty easy calculation because you look at your expenses, their income, and then what's the shortfall, and then that becomes your spousal support request. And so obviously the other person has to have enough funds to pay for it, but most states allow for a rehabilitative process if you have been that stay-at-home parent and your kids are still young. It's not reasonable for you to go work a full-time job, so you start off at part-time, and then when the kids get a little older, you have an actual spousal support schedule where it's kind of planned. You're going to return to the workforce in full time, like in 7 years when your youngest is in high school or whatever it is. And so
Mhm.
these concepts are pretty explosive. And if your spouse is of the mindset that, they either like they demand spousal support or they don't want to give you any, that becomes really hard if they are not open to taking their legal counsel's opinion seriously. It becomes really hard to get them to actually come to an agreement that isn't completely screwing you as a part of a
Mhm.
mediation case.
Yeah, so I guess here's a big question that I have. It seems like it's a catch 22, right? Because, at least in my experience, everyone wants to advocate for mediation because it's less contentious, it's more cost effective. If you end up in litigation for whatever reason, the judge is like, okay, well, have you tried mediation? So it almost seems like, at least in Virginia, in my experience, it almost seems like the step number one is to try mediation, right? But then in these high conflict cases where you have these, personalities that are just not going to be conducive to mediation. It's like, why even waste that effort? But then it's like, you have to, because if you go to court, they're going to be like, well, try mediation. What do you think is a good medium for that? Like, do you feel like people have to start out with mediation and see how it goes, or what do you think?
Well, each case is very individual, and obviously, some states really want you to do a mediation, but I think it's important for people to understand that all mediations are not created equal. So, oftentimes, like when you hire a private mediator, that person is trained in mediation. That is, a very different process when both parties elect to do it. Conversely,
Mhm.
when you have a court ordered mediation, that's like, it's called mediation, but it's really not.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I think you have to have reasonable expectations for your situation. And so, what I often do is I serve as a financial neutral and I
Mm.
help people at least get the financial facts. Because if you're able to build out the financial fact pattern, I call it a global settlement proposal. And so, kind of to step back, most people don't understand that a divorce is a lawsuit like anything else, and you actually need to have financial values associated with each topic. And so
Mhm.
outside of the kids, right? So when you look at divorce, there's really like two main contracts you have to negotiate. If you have children, what is your parenting plan schedule going to look like? And,
Mhm.
for the assets, how are you going to divide it? And if there's going to be spousal support paid and child support. And so
Mhm.
when you're looking through that financial lens, if you can work with the other party to at least get some of the documents to build out the financial facts, that will help you as you move into litigated divorce. Or if you're able to, do a lawyer negotiated settlement,
Mhm.
the more that you can kind of it sucks because people want divorce to be easy, and unless your marriage was easy and amicable and you have no assets, chances are your divorce is going to be a little bit more of a workout, and if they were high conflict, if they were looking to hide, if they're looking to screw you over, if they have unrealistic financial expectations, if they're weaponizing the kids, unfortunately, those are all symptoms of a long haul divorce.
Mhm. Do you find that the party that is willing to compromise, like that, and can end up hurting their case sometimes?
So most people, especially women, we leave about 7 times in our mind before we actually take that next step and tell the other person. And so as a result of that, by the time professionals are involved, we are so done. We want to be through with this. And then,
Tell me where to sign.
yeah, exactly. And then they start parading their new girlfriend around, and it just gets to be messy, and we want out. And that's kind of the time when you actually start bringing professionals in. You need to double down on what your actual divorce objectives are, and then work with the right professionals, a coach, an analyst, and an attorney to really handle each phase appropriately so you don't get decision fatigue. Otherwise, like, you're going to be making hundreds of thousands decisions from, the major ones, who gets the assets, down to like, what do we do with the bedroom furniture? Nobody wants it.
Right.
Can we burn it?
Right, right, right. Yes, and I mean, I coach these women and you look at their PSAs and they want like the deviled egg platter that they bought from Crate and Barrel, and it's like, well, is it your grandma's? Like, is there any sort of sentimentality to it? No, I use it all the time and he knows that, and like he's keeping it from me just to spite me, and I'm like, I will buy you a new egg platter from. Is it worth the anguish and the money? Like, you're spending more money to fight for the egg platter than the egg platter is actually worth, right? And so why do you think, or do you have any insight into why high functioning women, because they're not idiots, right? That talk to. It's usually very smart, well educated, level headed, women and men. Why do you think that they default to trying to be reasonable?
Well, I can speak from personal experience because before I was a divorce analyst for other people, I had to use financial analysis to get out of my own really super abusive relationship. And, when you're living in an ecosystem that is abusive and toxic and you're trying to survive, your brain goes through certain changes to survive. And most people don't realize it, but you essentially get Stockholm syndrome and you become trauma bonded to this person. And so I call my ex Voldemort. I have super complicated feelings towards him. And, you know, there was several incidences where he scared the hell out of me, and then a pretty big blow up where he tried to strangle me to death. And I still stayed with him after that because I was terrified to leave. And I was hoping every time he would show me any type of like kindness, I would think, oh, there's potential there. And so for me, I understood the emotions were so chaotic. I could not engage with them to try to make my way out of that relationship. But if I went through the financial variables, I could make this 100% a business deal and I could actually get out safely. And that's what I was able to do. And so I have seen this in my clients now where they are coming from abusive relationships. Maybe they weren't as physically abusive, but they were mentally and emotionally. And they still have the trauma bond brain. The brain has to try to keep you safe. And I often see clients. I've actually lost a client to domestic violence where she was strangled to death by her husband.
Mm.
And she was an amazing woman. She was top of her class. She argued in front of the Supreme Court. She had everything going for her, and she forgot how dangerous the man that she was sleeping was next to was. And so, her brain tried to reconcile, wanting a partner and, feeling that if she just loved him a little bit more, similar to me with Voldemort. I stayed with him for about 10 years, and I thought if I tap danced a little harder, he would eventually
Mhm.
come around. But I didn't realize that this man had a personality disorder and he was using all of these manipulation tactics to get what he wanted. And in fact, he had installed a lot of these buttons. And, to even take a further step back, when you examine toxic relationships, these guys are targeting us for our high amounts of empathy, because any other person would be like, holy crap, buddy. Like, no, I am not responsible for, your drunk driving accident. Like, this was
Right.
your personal decisions. And we go through, he had a bad childhood. Oh, he lost his father. Like, he had a hard day at work. And so, our empathy becomes weaponized. And it is one of the most disgusting things on the face of this planet. And it is so painful to actually acknowledge and, realize that our ability to love has been used against us. And they are going to continue to do that because that's one of the most wonderful traits as a human being, but it also opens us up for these tools of manipulation, unfortunately.
Yeah, you said that so, beautifully. And unfortunately, and I'm very sorry about your client. Unfortunately, just more and more, pretty much I feel that most of the women that come to me are abused in some way or another. What whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever you want, however it breaks down in their relationship. Sometimes it's all of the above, right? In this, we're talking about mediation and how it can be weaponized. What advice do you have, if any, for those women who are going through this with an abusive ex who are making these decisions out of fear of retaliation? Like, maybe they're being so compromising and being so reasonable because they're scared that if they don't do what this person wants, even if they're able to get their way, they know that they're going to pay one way or another afterwards.
So I think the first thing you absolutely have to do is work with a divorce coach like Shauna, because you need to start developing a new communication strategy and new boundaries. So many people don't realize that the divorce process is really supposed to be transformative. I mean, yeah, you have to handle like the finances, but if you guys have kids, you are going to have a relationship for the rest of your life. And if you do not lean into professionals and start developing good boundaries and using apps like Our Family Wizard, and maybe you have something that's better, but you need essentially kind of a referee so they don't harass you all hours of the day. And if they do, then that's great documentation. And the horrible thing, though, I've had clients that have literally, they've been exposed to crazy high levels of abuse where they have literally gotten their brain zapped through electroconvulsive therapy to counteract the abuse. And the psychologist was like, hey, this is due to the abuse at home. And the judge was like, meh. So it just takes an overwhelming amount of evidence. And the co-parenting apps like Our Family Wizard, that actually helps you start storing it. But what it also does is it prevents the other person from like saying certain words. And so it helps to put some guardrails on that. People don't want to block their ex. And you always should talk to your attorney if you do that. But, developing a new communication platform, but then also having hard boundaries. And I know with Voldemort, when he would text me, I'd be like, oh my God, it would just send my nervous system into a state of utter panic because, when I was living under the same roof as him, that was the beginning stages of the physical abuse. And like, if I didn't try to placate him immediately, it then led to him not being able to regulate his emotions. And so, regardless of the personality disorder that someone has, and frankly, it doesn't matter if they're a narcissist, a psychopath, whatever the hell they are, it matters. The most important thing at the end of the day is that they cannot control their emotions, and they are looking to you to do that. And so, you slowly have to wean them off of you and also wean yourself off of it, because I am a recovering codependent and I was responsible for everybody else's emotions except, well, including mine, but I never really had me because there was never any time. Yeah. And so you have to give yourself space to feel and to also put up a good boundary.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. I guess, is there any part of this conversation that you feel like we haven't touched on that we need to bring up that's important for people to hear?
I think the more that people begin this process with an end in mind, it becomes easier to withstand the assaults. And maybe not the physical assaults, but the mental assaults and, the constant harassment, and creating a system where it's not just an attorney. Because I have had cases, and I've been in this position where I hired an attorney and I'm like, thank God I could stop thinking. Well,
Right. Right.
yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't.
Or like, I have a lot of clients that I have to help prep for court, and rightfully so. They're very nervous. They're terrified, especially if their ex is like pro se and representing themselves, and they're going to be the one questioning them on the stand. That's a whole other level of
Yeah.
abuse of power, right? It shouldn't even be allowed, but whatever. Sometimes I have to tell them, like, if both parties are represented by a lawyer, I'm like, you can't, like, yes, it's still nerve-wracking, but you're paying them all of this money to speak on your behalf, right? So you don't have to think of every rebuttal. You don't have to think of every piece of evidence because your lawyer is there. So that was one of my things. Like, even, I did represent myself a little bit here and there, but then it finally just got so exhausting that it was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't think straight. I can't be a good mom. I can't do my job properly because all I'm thinking about is this case and the evidence and, all of these things. And so and that's why I hired a lawyer, because I was like, I need you to think for me. I need you to take this off of my plate, right? And it was just such a weight lifted off of my shoulders to be able to hand it over to someone else and be like, you handle this, right? And so I do think that's part of it, and being able to sit in court, and yes, you still have to testify, and that's a whole other thing that's crappy, but you're not the one having to question your ex, and your ex hopefully is not the one having to question you. I do think putting that buffer between you and the ex via an attorney or what have you can really do a whole lot for you and your nervous system.
Definitely. But you have to remember that your attorney works for you. And so, like, you can stop thinking a little bit because they're going to take over like the operations and stuff like that. But you have to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
That's where,
You're right. Thank you for reminding me of that. And I tell my clients that all the time, where I'm, because they're like, I don't know, whatever my attorney says. I'm like, no, like, this is your life. Like, whatever is on paper, you are going to be the one out in the world having to live this schedule or having to go by this budget. So, like, is this going to work for you? And sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, like, you don't know because it seems okay on paper. And then when you start living your life and you have that first holiday that you agree to split it this way, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize this is what it really meant. You know what I mean? So yes, you're totally right. You still have to be involved, but there is a layer of protection around you a little bit more so if you're just doing it blindly by yourself.
yeah, nobody should do it blindly by themselves. Like, you're going to get crappy emails from opposing counsel, or like if your spouse is like pro se, then from your spouse. And it is worth its weight in gold to have that bulletproof shield, because you don't need that. It's going to come in like right before you go to bed too. And you're going to check your email and be like, oh, shit, I'm not going to sleep tonight because I have to think about this.
Right.
And my kids have to go to soccer or whatever it is early in the morning, and I'm screwed. So,
Yeah, I know. It's speaking of, you had mentioned like blocking your ex, and I do advocate for that in certain ways. Like, there's a way to do it, but I'm like, if you have the kids and there's like not an emergency that you're, if the kids are with them, like, don't block them, right? But if the kids are with you, like, that for an hour or two at least, go ahead and do not disturb their number. If you have a birthday, holiday, a special
yeah.
occasion, block their number because they're going to try to ruin it.
Yes, exactly. If anything good is going on in your life, they're going
If you're
to.
having a good day,
Yeah.
block their they can smell it in the atmosphere. They're going to find some way to ruin it, I guarantee you. Okay, so like, what is one final piece of advice that you would say to someone who feels like they're losing their mind trying to stay logical in this whole process?
Gosh, That's a really good, only one piece. I mean,
Well, whatever you want to, 5 is fine, 10, 100.
I am a big believer in a divorce team. People tend to think I have an attorney, I'm good. And no, like your attorney is a linguistical warrior. They're going to file the paperwork, they're going to deal with the negotiation process. But you really need to, I always say an attorney is like a gun, and I am the bullets that you put into the gun.
Mm,
My financial report uses documentation. And if you're asking for spousal support, you can't just use estimates. And like the horrible thing is so many people are like, well, I think I spend, like $200. Oh, last night I had a call with a client and she's like, well, I spend $250 a month on food. And I'm like, okay, are you sure? Because when I did your like marital standard of living analysis, as a married couple, you guys are spending $6,000 a month. And
oh
so,
my.
yeah. And so it's like, at the very least, you're going to be spending $2,000. And so people tend to underestimate their actual expenses. And as you said, you have to live with this budget. If you are the one putting forward a proposal, you absolutely need to use documented facts. And unfortunately, this is really freaking tedious. I mean,
Yeah.
it sucks to build out a budget if you haven't been doing this your whole life and if you're not a math nerd. So
Yeah.
you break it down and you have an analyst like myself build out the financial fact pattern. And then you have someone like Shauna, a divorce coach, that's going to help you manage this stress, do all of the emotional hand holding. Because an analyst and an attorney, yeah, like we're human beings and we want to help, but that's not really what our training is. I'm very
Mhm.
analytical, and sometimes I see how my clients, they need more hand holding, and I rather have them work with a coach because that's going to help them actually create new patterns and new ways of doing things so they don't end up in that heightened nervous system state where they're still terrified. Because at the end of
Mhm.
the day, divorce is fucking terrifying. Sorry, I cussed. But
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, no, it is. And you hopefully it's a one and done. I mean, hopefully it's a zero, right? But unfortunately, we have our businesses for a reason, right? So hopefully you're one and done with the divorce. But like when I talk to clients, it's like nobody teaches you how to do any of this. You're not born knowing. I mean, they don't even teach us how to do our taxes, let alone, figure this stuff out. And much like you said, you're an analyst, you're not, an emotional support, person, even though, you are in your personality, but that's not your avenue. And much the same as me, like I can do numbers to an nth degree, but I'm not a financial analyst. And so like I might be able to help you with a basic budget or, tell you which documents I think you need to gather, but like I can't explain the best solution for you financially. So I am outsourcing, the financial part of it because I want you to have the right information. I want you to have, the budget that you can live with and negotiation tactics for Ks and investments and the properties and all of that. And so 100% agree with you to have a team. And I still think that people are learning this. I certainly didn't know that when I got divorced. And so I do think it's like their biggest asset is to have all of the professionals doing what they are best at. And you can't put all your eggs in one basket.
definitely. And, if you're a business owner, you absolutely need to be working with an analyst because that is so much more complicated. Or if you're an executive, things like this make your divorce a little bit more unique. And, people often forget attorneys aren't trained in law school. Like they don't get personal finance training, they don't get emotional support training. They are really designed to be linguistical warriors. They are, some people aren't bulldogs, but for the most part, it's all about this win lose outcome, unless you are specifically seeking attorneys that are trained in alternative conflict resolution. That's the type of skill set they're going to bring. You always have to be keeping in mind that divorce is really like a four-legged table where you have your opposing counsel, your spouse's attorney, your spouse, your attorney, and you. And if one leg is a little too long or a little too short, it's going to wobble. And if you're able to take an honest assessment, and maybe mediation's not the right step for you, but if you can help your spouse find an attorney and find one for yourself that's also rooted in conflict resolution, you can keep out of a litigated divorce, stay away from trial. Because those attorneys, like, not everybody needs a bulldog, right?
Right. They
And
think they do, which is
yeah,
it's a whole other conversation for another day. Yeah, whenever somebody's like, "I need a shark," I'm like, "Ugh, you don't. You just need a smart negotiator who has, of course, they can't be scared in the courtroom, but if they come in foaming at the mouth, the judge isn't gonna like that either, you know? It's
no.
yeah. So, okay, well, thank you so much for all of your insight today. I know when I saw that newsletter, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I see this every day. We've got to talk about it." And I always love hearing your side of things. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was wonderful to talk to you today, Shauna.
Yeah, and let people know if they do want to reach out to you, how do they find you?
Yeah, you can look me up online. Business is called Divorce Analytics, and the website is divorceanalytics.com. I offer free 30-minute consultations. It's never really 30 minutes.
It's so hard to get everything out in that 30 minutes. I understand.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm sure we will be talking soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Stay on for one.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're navigating the challenging journey of divorce and need personalized guidance, I'm here to help. As a dedicated divorce coach, I can support you through every step of the process, providing the tools and strategies you need to rebuild and thrive. Visit my website at shaunawardencoaching.com to book your appointment today. Remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Together, we can turn this difficult time into a new beginning. Until next time, take care and stay strong.